Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. Um, you've landed at accessory dwelling units, a path towards inclusive IDD housing. I should remember these titles because I think I wrote them. But we're so grateful that you took time to join us for this session. We have two extraordinary panelists, Mark Cote from Parkview Services and Jennifer Knapp from Community Vision, who are going to be talking about how their organizations are using accessory dwelling units to create opportunities for inclusive housing. So I'm going to hand you to Jennifer, I believe.
Well, thanks, Robin. Good morning, everybody. We figured this would be a little bit smaller crowd since it's a little more of a niche focus with accessory dwelling units, but we're so glad you have joined us. So Mark and I are going to share some of the examples that we have started to do, and we're actually hoping to leave some time for questions because this is a fairly new idea, and would love to hear more thoughts from you. So we're going to start off. Victory is ours, with what we're going to do today. So basic agenda is we're going to talk a little bit about ADUs. What are they? Just in case you don't know what that is. Then we have two different models. So there's a nonprofit owner model and an individual homeowner model. So kind of different ways to approach ADUs. And then talk about what are some things that we are learning with working with different jurisdictions and opportunities for some next steps. And first, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the Cooney Foundation. They have been a really innovative funder in the space of disability and housing in general, and particularly with taking a risk on models like this that are, again, quite experimental. So want to do a big shout out to them. So before Mark talks a little bit about ADUs, just wanted to introduce my organization, Community Vision. We are based here in the Portland metro area, so the Tri-Counties, and our focus has always been individualized services for folks with disabilities. And historically, and still currently, our biggest program is called supported living. And gets very confusing in the housing world with permanent supportive housing, which is a totally different thing. So what supported living is in the disability space is essentially staff support one-on-one for people living in their own home or apartment. So we have about a team of about 100 direct support staff who work with 50 folks in their own apartments wherever they live. And that is really, really critical to whether it's ADUs or any sort of housing to be able to have the staff to make life successful. The second thing that we do, which is a more unique opportunity, is a housing access program. So for folks in the Tri-County area who have disabilities, they come to us and we help match them to affordable apartments. So these are not our apartments. We have a whole database of 550 properties and growing from a presentation yesterday, learning about more of them. And it is, so some folks have physical accessibility needs and other people just need an apartment. But pretty much everyone needs affordable. And so it's just finding that match for folks and then doing things like tenant education. We're working on universal design, helping other developers technology lab. And this is getting increasingly more interesting as technology has exploded. I would say a silver lining of COVID is that, particularly for folks with disabilities, the idea that technology should be part of their lives has now happened. And so people who were resistant before to any sort of technology, we see that as much more vital. And so we are working on things like smart homes and all kinds of different ideas that can actually support folks to be more independent than they would be otherwise. So that is a little bit of an overview of what Community Vision is all about. And I will let Mark tell you about Parkview.
Hello, my name's Mark. Is this, does that say Parkview? Great. Yeah, my name is Mark Cody. I'm the Executive Director of Parkview Services. Parkview Services was founded in 1967 by a family that had a child with Down syndrome, and they wanted a solution, community-based housing solution for their child that wasn't an institution. It was incorporated as Parkview Homes for Exceptional Children. Parkview has several programs, including a home ownership program where we provide home buyer education, down payment assistance loans to help households that have a member who's a person with IDD become first-time homeowners. That program also does post-purchase counseling, including mortgage default counseling. We have a small supported living service business that we have 11 clients right now. And in roughly 1998, we decided to go into developing housing, in part because we felt that it was hard to make the organization financially sustainable with a small supported living services program. And we didn't want to compromise the quality of our support services. And so basically in the late 90s, we sold like 7 of our homes and then invested the money so we could subsidize the group home work. So currently we have about 68 properties in King, Snohomish, and Pierce counties. And we have plans to create more housing in Spokane. Hopefully we'll get funded for those developments, because as you heard, there's a high need for housing in Washington State. Yeah. So one of the things that we wanted to do, well, let's see, wait a minute. Okay, well, I'll talk about that in a minute when I go to the actual project. So what is an ADU? Basically, an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. It's either connected to the home or on the property, and it can't be sold separately, but it can be rented. It has a separate entrance. There are basically two types of ADUs: attached, an accessory dwelling unit, that's an ADU, and then there's also a detached, which is a DADU, which is that a DADU is separate, so it has its own foundation. Like tiny houses with a foundation are considered DADUs. Yeah, so why accessory dwelling units? It's integrated into the community. It's private. The land is available, and I'll say that for Parkview, it's the ADUs are very important because, like, the city of Seattle has not created single family housing for people with IDDs since 2001. And so, and there is a high need for housing there. So Parkview has 15 properties in the city of Seattle. But we were precluded from doing ADUs or DADUs because of zoning. So there was an owner occupancy requirement that and since we're not occupying the property, we couldn't do that. And then in 2019, there was legislation passed in Washington, not Washington, but in Seattle that removed that barrier. So we just immediately wanted to create more housing. And we got funded by the Cooney Foundation for a project that I'll talk about in a minute. That's a pilot project on one of our Seattle properties. So the housing prices too are really skyrocketing in Seattle, everywhere, but Seattle in particular. And so adding an ADU to a property that's already owned removes the cost of the land, which is a benefit. Yeah, there's other things too. In the city of Seattle, one of the things that there's public funding to help homeowners build accessory dwelling units as a way of staving off gentrification. So aging people, they can't afford to stay in the home, but if they have a rental that brings them income, they potentially could stay. So, and yeah, and it's not the only solution, of course, but it's an exciting solution for Parkview. Okay. Yeah, so one of the things that, oops, sorry. Yeah, so what are some of the benefits for people with IDDs? So one of the issues that we've had in general in Parkview is we have about 14 condominiums, so those have common walls. And in those rental units, there's some challenges sometimes with the neighbors. If there's someone with autism that's, banging the cupboards or vocalizing, that can be a problem. So those are harder for us to rent. So a ADU that's detached would mitigate that. That's one of the reasons why we like single family homes, is because there's no common walls with the neighbors. Yeah, and then if you're building new, then you have control of the design. So yeah, okay. So now I just want to talk about the project that Cooney Foundation helped fund, and that. Let's see. Oh yeah. Yeah, so like I was saying, we have 15 properties in Seattle. And so this particular project is actually, we identified this particular project for an individual who lost their community-based housing because of a behavioral issue. We call it Eddie's house. Basically, Eddie lived in that the multifamily setting for 10 years. And then he started having some issues that caused trouble with the neighbors. And it got to a point where the landlord didn't want him to be there any longer. And so we did this pilot project. Well, it's not done yet. We're actually just now bidding. We've got bids for contractors, so we're getting close to breaking ground. So this, the floor plan is, the city of Seattle has a bunch of floor plans that they're supposedly, and that's in quotes, pre-approved by the city. So we thought we would buy an accessible, fully accessible plan to sorry. In hopes that it would speed up the process of going through the planning department. Yeah, okay, so this is showing the sort of the lot. And you can see there's a cul-de-sac. The top cul-de-sac is where the main entrance from the main house is. And then there's another cul-de-sac, and we were locating Eddie's house there in order to have a separate access. We're also going to add a fence to be able to have more isolation between the other house. There's our supported living service providers. It won't be the same one. They're separate. And can be some tension between service providers, we're finding out. So, but this will, with the separate access and the fence, we're hopeful that it's going to be successful. One of the things that we had to get was we had to do a curb cut on the cul-de-sacs to create a driveway. Because in supported living services staff, you need staff and they need a place to park. That's one of the things that's challenging with some of the larger multifamily projects, because parking can be an issue. Let's see. Yeah, and there was a preclusion to doing a curb cut, but we were able to get a modification or a variance because of the disability. Okay. What's the next? So one of the things that we're learning is, like I was saying, that though you don't have the cost of the land, it is not a cheap a model. And there was lots of like infrastructure that we had to put in to tie the sewer lines, and that complicated and added cost to the project. Yeah, so you can read the lessons learned there. But we are very hopeful that this is going to be something that we can duplicate on, especially on our City of Seattle's properties. And then we're also advocating in other municipalities to raise the barrier of owner occupancy. Okay, I'll hand it over to Jen.
Thanks, Mark. All right, so Seattle and Portland are similar but different, as you can imagine. And so a little bit about kind of how we have approached this work in Portland. The stars actually have aligned for once, which is kind of lovely, right? Yeah, I mean, you spend so much time banging your head against the door. When the stars align, it's pretty great. So we have been excited to be able to explore this model for folks with disabilities, and turns out it very much fits with what the city wants to do in having more infill housing. Now, stars didn't align perfectly. I don't know if I have anybody from the city of Portland here, but the permitting process was a little more challenging than we'd like to talk about, but it's going to change for places like Bend, I already know. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that. But the exciting thing is, again, on the philosophical level, it very much fits with what a lot of the cities are trying to do, right? We have a lot of single family homes. We're trying to make more density. So we had the opportunity as Community Vision to get involved with yet another way that things are happening. So you've got the goal of infill, and then there was this process called Mas Casitas. Has anybody heard of Mas Casitas? It's with Hacienda CDC. Yeah. So again, speaking of stars lining, this was a pretty amazing process. So let me tell you a little bit about the idea of Mas Casitas. Again, it is Hacienda CDC. It is not me. So I want to be very clear. Details, they have a whole website that I put up there that you can learn more about. But basically what it is, it's taking a new process called mass timber. And so it's enough to be dangerous here. It's like pushing wood together that makes it way stronger. So essentially building with wood that wasn't previously able to be used. So I think it's trees that are smaller and often couldn't be processed before with big timber. So it's a sustainable process. And then it's modular housing. So they built it at the Port of Portland. And then just dropped it in. So it is, again, it's in the pilot stage, so they're still figuring it out. But the idea is once they figure out this process a little better, then it can really be affordable ways to build, not just on the housing side, but actually the building will be cheaper. And so they had some sites in places that had fire, and they were replacing the housing there, and several other places. And then we got lucky to be able to be part of their project in Portland. So again, anytime us as nonprofits make things happen, there's partners, right? There's multiple people coming together to make it happen. And so just a little bit about this specific site. So Community Vision was actually donated a piece of land from Multnomah County about 10 years ago. But I think in a previous session, I think Terry said, free is never free. So turns out why they donated this is because you couldn't access it. It was landlocked. And so the first step is we had to get an easement from another owner that owned a little piece so we could actually get into the site. So this project came along, we're like, all right, we're getting through that. So that was step one, got through, figured out how to do an easement, paid the people the value of that little plot of land. And so now we could actually use the property. And then Hacienda, actually this first round, donated the actual homes, which is incredible. So it's a 3-bedroom home and an ADU. And again, used with this mass timber housing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do 30% of area median income for the ADU, and that will be for a person with a disability. We're also going to put a little tiny home on there. I'll tell you a little bit about that story. That will also be at 30% AMI. And then the three-bedroom home will be at 60% of area median income. And that will not be designated for somebody with a disability. Because again, our goal is that they're part of a community, right? You have some folks with and some folks who don't have disabilities. So that will just be a family, hopefully somebody who needs the 3 bedrooms will be in that home. So that is what's happening. And just last week, the picture on the far right is them dropping the homes into the site. So this just happened. The picture on the left is how it was being built at the port. So you can see there's 2 different ones. The navy with the kind of pink is the ADU, and then the navy with the yellow is the 3-bedroom. And what they did, so the 3-bedroom, it's like 2 of the ADUs that they just put together to make the 3-bedroom. So they're really trying to have thoughtful design. And the cool thing is, again, because we serve folks with disabilities, they also incorporated accessibility into these. So they have a couple of different designs now that is pretty cool. And so then that middle picture is just the kitchen area of the ADU. And they want to really celebrate the wood in this project. So they're leaving a lot of the wood exposed for that kind of rough look. But yeah, it's been really fantastic. And again, this is an example of a unique thing where, because of what Hacienda is doing, there is state interest. And again, we're trying to do proof of concept here, right? So if we can prove it's possible, then we can get hopefully larger sums of funding to make more of these happen. So that's example one for us, along with Mark's example of when a nonprofit is the owner. So at least for right now, yeah, I'll get you. At least for right now, Community Vision is going to own that, partly because it's a new process and they want to make sure that, you know, the modular housing doesn't fall apart. So they need to monitor it. But there's also the possibility that in the future that could turn into a home ownership model and we could have people purchase it. Yeah, question. Oh, perfect. So yeah, at least for now, that's why we are the owner. But with this project, that the bigger project around ADUs, we wanted to have different ways for this to happen, because turns out most of the people who own single family homes are just humans, right? They're just folks who aren't nonprofits, they're just people. And so we wanted to figure out, is there a way to do this ADU model affordably for a person with a disability with a individual homeowner? And the answer is yes. So here is a first example, and this is in the city of Gresham. So here's something that's fun, is that the jurisdictions every jurisdiction has different rules. So for example, in the city of Portland, the requirement for ADUs is that you're 5 feet setback from the property line. Reasonable. Gresham, 15 feet. So you have to have any building 15 feet away from your property line. So what it meant for this house is that actually we had to build an attached ADU because the property wasn't big enough to have a detached one. So again, these are the fun things that you learn as you do ADUs. So you can see from the construction picture that the house was already there, and they then built on the ADU. And one of the cool things about this particular example is this is a person who used Proud Ground to be a homeowner. So there's somebody who are low income themselves. So I don't know if do people know what Proud Ground is, land trust? If not, I can tell you just quickly. So essentially, Proud Ground and others, but Proud Ground's the one I know of here, they are land trusts. So Proud Ground as the entity owns the land, and then the person or the homeowner owns the building. So it's a way to have more affordable home ownership. So for people who can maybe get a loan for some amount of money, but they couldn't afford to do the whole thing, Proud Ground owns the land and helps reduce that cost so that the mortgage is just on the house itself. So Kristen is the homeowner, and her vision, this is an example of kind of a transitional plan. So her vision is for the next few years for her son to be able to live in the ADU as a step towards independence. And then after that, to be able to have somebody else from the community be able to live there. And so that is what we did here. And we're able to, again, use this a design that was incorporating the location. Again, like I said, the main thing here was that it had to be attached because of those set aside or setback. Oh, now I'm getting my words confused. Setback requirements. Another one that we are doing is in Northeast Portland, we're actually doing a tiny home. Now, one thing I do want to give a caveat for this, because I know this is across Oregon, and my understanding is that for tiny homes themselves, in Portland, it's legal to have them permanent. Like they can actually be there physically, permanently. I don't think that's the case everywhere. So I just want to give that caveat. But this is the homeowner is a person in the community who is interested in having an ADU or a tiny home. And so how this one worked is, you can see it's again, similar, it was modular housing. It was being built in the factory. And then the little pad in the middle is the site work that has to do, because you still have to, create the hookups and all of that so that the tiny home can be permanent. And so this is an interesting too for both of these individual homeowners. They haven't been landlords before, right? So it's my house, and now I'm a landlord for a person who is going to be living on my property. And so one of the things that we have also learned through this process is that we need to do some guidance for them. So basic things about what are tenant rules and do you have to, things like you need to give notice. You can think like, oh, it's in my backyard. I can just go over when I want. Turns out, actually, they have privacy and a bunch of things about just kind of things to think through before. So what are the rules about sharing space? Right? What's my space? What's your space? What's shared? These are all the things that are nuances when you have a homeowner who's used to having their yard be theirs, and now you have another person living there. So that, again, wonderful delays have caused that the actual unit to not be finished. We hope it will be done in the next month or two. But that's an example of a tiny home. And then we did one other project that was another detached ADU in Portland. So from these experiences, some of the things that we have learned, in addition to Mark's insights, is what I already just mentioned, is that new landlord education is needed for folks. The good thing, though, too, what I didn't put on this slide, is there's really interest. I mean, we've had so many homeowners, as we've done a few of these, really be interested in having long-term affordability and having a person having support to help build the ADU and then to be able to have it be affordable. Again, for those of you who are in the Portland area, you probably already know this, but one of our biggest challenges as a city with ADUs is so many of them are being built for short-term rental. So for Airbnbs, and then that is actually almost furthering some of our housing challenges as opposed to help to solve them. And so it's been really cool to see that actually there's homeowners who are interested in having an ADU that is used for this purpose. And if we can come in with some funding to help make it affordable, then they're still going to get rent from the tenant. But then with that funding gap, then they can still pay the small mortgage that they're going to have from building it and keep it affordable. And that is the next point here, is just to be able to build these, we have to get a little creative about financing. Because unlike, multifamily where there's all these nice, clear ways, I was actually learning about them. They're very confusing, but there's at least ways, all the bonds and that happen. In ADUs, that's not the case, right? Because you're talking about an individual homeowner. It's such small scale. And so we have been able to, again, with the support of the CUNY Foundation, be able to do some of these pilots. The Hacienda example, I think, is another way where these can be, if they can be built affordably, then there's a way to be able to keep doing them. And the other thing I want to note too, especially on the individual options, is that we wanted to make sure that the homeowners had some skin in the game. Because again, they're going to be benefiting from the rent. And so to make sure that there was some level of investment from the homeowners in this process. So that was really important. Again, what we were able to do, this third point here, is so far it's just private funds, but the private funds being able to, again, lower that cost down to that 30% of area median income, so that, as we talked about before, many folks with disabilities, that's what they can afford. Then the final note in terms of size and accessibility. So as we have done, we're working on the fourth. We have learned that about 500 square feet is the magic number to actually be fully accessible. So once you're below that, again, the tiny homes are not accessible. I want to be very clear. They're actually on wheels. There's stairs involved. I've heard people talking about creating whole ramp situations to tiny homes, but we haven't done that yet. But with both the detached ADU as well as the Mas Casitas, we were able to do fully accessible, but that's kind of the amount, especially just because of turning radiuses. That's one of the biggest challenges. So once you get so small, there's just not a way to make it fully accessible. So I wanted to have that note. Again, many people with disabilities, many people who need housing, we don't need to have 100% be accessible, but we always try to create as many as we can. So where are we going from here? This is where we'd love to open it up to a little bit more discussion, but wanted to say a couple of thoughts before we get questions and comments from you all is this is new, right? This is new for a lot of our jurisdictions, is how do we start incorporating all these ideas about ADUs and tiny homes? And while they want to do this, turns out it can be pretty complex, and that each place, again, even us just doing it in 2 cities, and as Mark learned from Seattle, even things that they say should be easy can get more complicated. And so as we move past some of these pilot phases, part of the purpose for people like us doing it is that we can learn from this and then hopefully have more streamlined recommendations. Again, the city of Portland and the city of Gresham, as 2 examples, are definitely interested in that and wanting their vision is to create 6 weeks, that it would be within 6 weeks, the permitting process is done and clear and easy. And I think we will get there, but I want to be clear that we have not been there. But again, jurisdictions then learning from each other or starting to have guidance even from the state about how we could build ADUs so that there's less of a difference between each jurisdiction will be important. Also, fees. So there's the guidance on things, like I said, like setbacks, but then one city will charge for system development fees. Others will give you a waiver if you're building affordable housing. So it's all varies by jurisdiction. And the more that we keep doing this and talking to each other, and again, hopefully coming up with a set of guidance that actually encourages affordable ADUs, and instead of just doing all of the Airbnbs. And so with that, I think as we can get past this pilot stage of trying a few one-offs, that we can actually try to explore what does that look like for government to subsidize. So in our experience, the subsidy that's needed to make it affordable is actually similar to the amount that's needed for multifamily. So even though you're building it by itself, as Mark noted, you don't have the land cost. It is a one-off, but for about a similar amount, it seems like this could be a viable option. And so if we can find mechanisms for that funding to happen, I mean, anybody who has been involved in any funding, right? Scattered site, anything is more difficult to get funded than the multifamily, but we would love to pursue that. And then finally, just want to continue to give a shout out and hope that it will keep happening, that this experimenting with private funding can be a way to do the proof of concept so that we can get enough interest to go back to that government funding. And so even at this small scale, recognizing the braiding that needs to happen, and thanks to those private funders, especially CUNY, that has been willing to do that. So here's the statement, right? That ADUs can be an affordable solution that create new living opportunities for people with IDD. And we are excited about it. I remember when the first person moved in to the ADU, this was the detached one, and I was giving her the tour, and she was looking around and she teared up. And she said, "Jen, I never thought I'd be able to live in my own home and to not have to share walls with other people," and to realize that's how many of us have that goal, right? And given her income and given her disability, she never thought that was going to be possible. And yet it was. So Again, this is definitely one of those one person at a time solutions that are complicated, but the outcome can absolutely be worth it. So that is where we are right now, and would love to take questions and also comments. This is, again, we know this is experimental, so we'd love for this to be your thoughts and insights as well. So yeah, Robin will
Thanks, Jen
monitor
and
that.
Mark. Great. Any questions or comments? All right.
Yeah.
This is for Mark, and I'm not super familiar with Washington State, so I want to start with that. How do you, so I assume that there are certain requirements for how many people can live together in group home settings. With the ADUs, is there an issue for the state of Washington?
No, yeah, in Washington, it's 4 people maximum that can live together, but if it's a separate unit, and so the state is supporting more of that, just in part because those, we need more housing. And as long as it's not, you know, the same entrance, the state has been fine with it. That they, including like going to duplexes and triplexes.
Coming right back to you.
Um, can you talk about the cost of the project? I know there has been an estimate that it takes as 1% the cost of housing. Yeah.
Can you talk about the cost of accessible housing?
Especially in this project.
Accessibility in this project,
These.
in these projects?
So you mean the cost to develop the property or cost to live?
Accessibility features to the project.
Okay. Well, and this particular one, since it's new construction, we could build it totally accessible. So in the cost is for this particular detached accessory dwelling unit is about $450,000.
Yeah, thanks. And in our experience, there wasn't actually an increased cost, again, because it's a single unit. And if you're just doing it from the beginning, from the design, you can do things like have the grab barbs prepped and decide what sort of shower you need, and again, design it with accessibility in mind. And so because you're not trying to fit it in a structure where the layers all have to line up of the multiple floors and all that, there is actually way less of an increased cost. I don't know, because we don't have a lot of side-by-side comparisons. That's the other thing I want to say about ADUs is every site is unique, right? And so we have a vision, and I think it sounds like the city of Seattle did too, of being able to have a few designs that a lot of people can use. At least in Portland sites, each lot is so unique that we've had to, again, even this like detached versus attached, we've had to have different designs in each one. Now we have started to use the same builder because they've started to get smart. And so like the first one was a garage conversion, and now they're going to do another garage conversion. So they'll just have to tweak instead of hopefully redesign. But I'm getting off the point. The point is, because it is designed, it's just a single unit, then you build those costs right in there. At least as far as we know, there isn't a significant cost difference from accessible versus not. Oh, yeah. Please, yeah. Maybe you can contradict me or add more context.
No, I think it depends. And I only say this because we, at Horizon have been building new group homes specifically for aging in place and universal design. So what we're finding is if we break it down with the contractor as we add accessible features, some are negligible, like grab bars, just put the extra wood in there. You can throw them in, it's not a big deal. If you're really looking to have zero barrier bathrooms that are as solid as you can and sustainable for long-term wear and tear and whatever's going on, that's going to be a bigger. So it depends on the accessibility feature. We found it can be anywhere from 6,000 to 25,000, depending on what you're doing to make it accessible. So, and especially if you're looking at trying to build up a slope, but you want to make sure you have zero barrier entries. So the site also depends on that. So
yes, I want to clarify for want you to be able to comment too, but yeah, to clarify, the sites that we've been able to work with so far have been fairly flat. So I do think the variability with slope makes a huge difference, of course, in terms of that no step entrance.
So I have a question. So the pre-made tiny homes are now getting more and more popular. So have any of us think about reach out to those manufacturers to pre-order those kind of tiny pre-made home, make it bigger, make it more accessible to DD population? So any developers think about that, like doing a long-term partnership with those manufacturers?
I love how you think. Great question. So one little caveat, and this is a little bit of a technicality, but a tiny home is technically on wheels. And so one of the biggest challenges in terms of accessibility is that fact that it's on wheels. And that in terms of the size, so it has to be able to roll down the road. So there are some inherent limitations with size, again, with the technical term of a tiny home. So I want to just put that caveat out there. But in terms of your thoughts, in terms of partnerships with some of these manufacturers, that's absolutely one of the goals. And right now they are building so fast that they are not interested in any conversations because they have more work than they can do. But that is definitely a goal. And but in terms of manufacturing, again, I'll go back to so as I had mentioned before, the Mas Casitas project is one of those examples of trying to build affordable modular housing. And so I think back to your thought of, can there be partnerships with some of these builders? That's absolutely the goal of Mas Casitas. And I just wanted to say a quick hello, Leticia, who just came in the back, is the project manager on all of that. So if you actually want to know about the modular housing that I was talking about, so again, maybe some of the other companies, yes, but that is explicitly the goal of this kind of building with the mass timber. So great thought.
Hi, my name's John. I'm with Peregrine Relocations, and this isn't really my field, but I'm interested when Mark was talking about getting a permission for the curb cut. Is that to get like an easement or permission for making a property more accessible? Did you need to have a person going into that property who is already had a need for that, or can you like plan for future use and get that sort of
Well, I think it is possible to plan for future use, but in this particular case, it was specific to the person who is going to be living there. So this, the planning department wanted some information about the disability and the need for separate entrance and driveway, so.
And I just wanted to thank you both for presenting this alternative and planting these ideas. I think one of the things that's important to remember, I'm always fascinated by the draw to have like a one size fits all, like what's the solution and what model should we invest in? And the whole point I hope of today and these 5 sessions from CUNY is we need a lot of different models. So, and while you're all here doing this housing, we're going to continue to run interference with our DD organizations, because the question that was brought up earlier, like, does DDA care if it's just this one person living in their own place? You know, we have all these historical barriers, like DDA can save money if 4 or 5 people live together out of economy of scale. They won't have to pay as many staff. It's just easier to provide more food for that household. Like, it's always money, right, that drives these kinds of issues. So we'll continue to run that interference. What we also learned from deinstitutionalization is people who went from group homes to apartments, sometimes they became very isolated. They didn't have friends. They didn't have people coming in enough, and they were alone too much. We also learned that people with developmental disabilities have relationships. Maybe they didn't have one before they moved in, but then they found a boyfriend or a girlfriend who wants to move in, or they got married. And then all of a sudden DDA cared whether or not somebody without a disability was living with this person with DD. So there will continue to be these challenges that we'll have to work together on. You as housing developers, you know, hopefully we'll be able to turn back to the DD world folks and say, just tell us other things that you need. We'll keep building. You keep running interference with those DD organizations, because at the end of the day, everybody's got their own thing, right? And we need a lot of different models. So I'm just so grateful that you've found another way to do this, and we'll keep finding more ways to do this.
Thanks. Just want to say the caveat of finding instead of found, just because again, it is really experimental. And also I want to clarify that for many people, just as you said, Stacy, for many people, apartment living is great. And actually that is an amazing way to have people who don't have disabilities be in your life, right? That is wonderful. And that's also what we're starting to find here. So again, the person that I was talking about who moved in and had tears in her eyes right when she first moved in, she's developed a relationship with the homeowner that's there, right? And so that has kind of become of just a built-in community connection. And there's block parties that happen in that community and things that now she's a part of, that again has nothing to do with her disability. It's just because she is a member of a neighborhood. And that is something that doesn't always happen in the same way in some of the larger complexes. So I do want to, thanks for making that statement. I just want to point that out too, that community connection can happen in a lot of different ways.
Other questions?
So for the ADUs that are on private property, how does the ownership of the structure work? And then what restricts them from switching it over to an Airbnb at some point?
What an excellent question. Nothing. We just believe them. No, I'm kidding. So first of all, to answer the first part of your question, that they maintain ownership. So this is a grant towards the building of the ADU, and the property owner owns it. However, there is also with that a couple of deeds, and one is for ensuring affordability. And so that is for 10 years. So that is the one thing that's different with ADUs than a lot of bigger projects, is that the requirement for affordability is shorter. So it's been for 10 years as opposed to 30 or indefinite in a lot of other ones. And that's partly just to reflect the lower cost. Again, our hope is that at the end of that 10 years, they say, let's do it again. But there's not a guarantee beyond that. And but through those agreements as part of receiving the funds, that is part of what the homeowners are signing off on.
That raises an interesting question for me, thinking about eviction laws here in Oregon, especially, which are really strong. In a situation where someone perhaps lived in an ADU for 10 years and then was being evicted because the homeowner had decided to go to fair market rent. I know this is future planning, but have you thought about, with the 10% cap, I think is what it is here in Oregon, right? How difficult, it'd be probably pretty difficult for someone to actually switch over in any sort of, meaningful way unless I guess they could pay to have the person move out type of thing. But have you thought through those things?
An excellent question indeed. And I would say certainly we have thought about it. We haven't solved for it yet because we're in literally year one. But that, I mean, there is not a guarantee. I mean, again, this is rental housing, just like any other rental housing. So that is one of probably the differences between the individual homeowner model and a nonprofit. Probably you can have a little better sense of guarantee with the nonprofit. So I don't have the answer yet, but I do think, again, as I've talked to a lot of people in Portland, there's folks who understand the need for affordable housing. And so while we don't have all the solutions yet, I think continuing to explore this one is worth it. And again, they would still have to be able to, they can't just kick the person out, right? Like you said, there are some, all tenant laws still apply even in this situation. So there are some protections, but again, there isn't security in the same way that there might be with some other models. That's absolutely true.
One thing that I think that we've done with home ownership is have the where the person with disability couldn't own the property. I can't remember the reason for it. It was something to do with Social Security. And so we made the owner give the person with disability a life lease so that they couldn't, kick them out. So, I mean, that could be a way to do it because you don't want to kick the person out that's been there for 10 years.
Yeah, and just to clarify, a person with a disability can absolutely own a home. That is legal. They can. But in terms of this situation where it's an ADU, that the whoever the homeowner is not the person living in the ADU. So yeah, it's an important clarification. Thanks.
Any other questions? Oh,
How many, I'm curious to know if you've gotten significant interest from parents or family members of IDD people, and whether, I mean, because that would present a whole, people are going to be concerned about making sure their kids can live there forever.
Well, I'm definitely going to pursue this. Jen gave me this idea. So, and I was thinking about parents because there's a big need for housing and parents want a solution, especially aging parents. So.
I mean, I'd make sure I understand your question. Were you saying, are parents interested in this or are they worried about it? Got it. So already, and I'm sure this is happening throughout the community, there are families who are creating this kind of thing already on their own, right? Like they're creating basement apartments, or if they already have a mother-in-law suite or something for transitional housing for their own kids. So that is happening. Again, ADUs can be part of that kind of option. So absolutely, parents are very interested in this and wanting to see that their own place isn't the only option. Because for many people, that's a wonderful transitional step, but it's still not independence, right? You're still living with your family. And so for many of the families that we've talked to, they're wanting to create some options that, like, again, this can be a wonderful transitional option, but then they're hoping that there is a next step. And I think that's an important thing in general. And it goes back to the risks with rentals. There isn't a guarantee, but I think as we continue to evolve our thinking around people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, that it's not always housing for life, that needs can change. And if we can get past some of the scarcity, that maybe, oh, this is a great solution for a few years. Again, a tiny home. One of our big questions is it going to just be too small for folks, right? Will people want to live there? And hopefully, but it might also be a case where only for a little while, and then maybe they want something different. So to allow folks with disabilities to be able to have changing desires, I think is another important thing. And so we want to keep as Stacy had pointed out earlier, keep creating a whole myriad of options so that people's needs and desires can continue to grow and evolve. So yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? I've got one. I'm really excited by this and wondering what would be some sort of appropriate next steps for homeowners who might be interested in exploring doing this. What would be your advice?
Call me. Would be great. No, there's actually a variety of entities that are doing that. So a couple that I could recommend if you're interested in going the tiny home route, there is a company called Tiny Hookups. It doesn't mean hookups. It means hook. Yeah, I know, terrible name in my opinion, but they're fantastic. And also Back Home ADU is another entity that is working on ADUs and thinking through the financing. So certainly Community Vision is not the only organization thinking about this here in the area, but those would be a couple of other places. I would definitely recommend doing your homework and learning. There's a kind of a whole community around tiny homes and ADUs, and they love to show off their things. So go and take a look at one that's already there and work with one of those entities on the affordable side.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, if you were interested in renting to a person with an intellectual or developmental disability, how would you go about doing that?
Again, there's actually not a lot of requirements that are different than any other tenant. It depends on, again, what the person's support needs are, and people are able to sign leases just like other folks. And so what I would suggest is if you're interested specifically in renting to somebody with a disability, to contact a case management entity to say, hey, I've got this property. They're the ones who have the best access to the greatest number of people.
That's exactly what I was looking for. All right. Any final questions for our wonderful panelists? Excellent. Well, thank you, Mark and Jennifer. We really appreciate you spending time. Thank you all for coming. This afternoon, there is a session on fair housing as it relates to folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I hope you will be able to attend that. And thank you.